Rain whispered against the windows of Maple Diner, a small corner restaurant tucked between a laundromat and a pawn shop on a quiet Brooklyn street. The neon sign outside flickered red and white, reflecting off the puddles that stretched across the cracked sidewalk. Inside, the smell of coffee butter and rain mixed in the air, wrapping the few late-night customers in a kind of tired warmth. Julian Hart sat in the farthest booth by the window, his gray jacket still damp from the walk, a paper napkin folded neatly beside a half-empty cup of black coffee. He looked like any man waiting too long for someone who might not come. The waitress had refilled his cup twice without asking, glancing at him, with that mix of pity and curiosity, reserved for lonely people who didn't know they looked lonely. It had been 40 minutes since the message on his dating app buzzed. "Can't wait to meet you, Jay. I'll be there at 7:30. He had arrived early, just as he always did, but the seat across from him remained empty, and the coffee had gone cold. His reflection in the glass was faint, almost ghost-like against the city lights beyond. The truth was, no one in this diner knew that the man sitting there had once been on the cover of Forbes, or that his company's name, HeartMind, still lit up skyscrapers downtown. Tonight he was simply Jay. The alias was easier, cleaner, quieter. He had deleted the chauffeur's number, left the penthouse in Manhattan, and taken the subway to this diner, as if to prove to himself that he could still be ordinary. But ordinary, he was learning, came with its own silence. He checked his watch, though he already knew the time. 43 minutes late. He pressed his thumb against the side of his cup, feeling the faint chill of the coffee. Maybe she had changed her mind. Maybe she'd seen his photo and decided she didn't like the way he smiled. Maybe she had simply forgotten. A part of him wanted to laugh. A bigger part wanted to leave before that familiar ache settled in. The ache of waiting for someone who never came. He slid a few bills beneath the saucer, grabbed his jacket, and stood. The chair legs scraped against the tiled floor, drawing a glance from a truck driver at the counter. Julian nodded politely, pulling his hood up. The bell over the door jingled as he stepped toward the exit. That was when it happened. The door swung open, a gust of rain blowing in with a blur of yellow. A small girl, maybe 7, stumbled inside, clutching a dripping umbrella almost as big as her. Her curly brown hair stuck to her forehead, and her cheeks were flushed from the cold. She looked around the diner with the wide-eyed urgency of someone on a mission, then spotted him immediately. She ran straight toward him, her rain boots squeaking on the tile. "Excuse me," she said between quick breaths. "My mommy said to tell you she's sorry she's late. She's just helping someone outside." The sound of her voice was soft but certain, echoing across the quiet diner. Julian blinked, unsure if he had heard correctly. "I'm sorry," what he asked, gently lowering himself to her level. The girl pushed a wet curl behind her ear. "She said to tell you not to leave. She's coming. She just helped a man who fell near the subway." Julian hesitated, his mind scrambling to make sense of it. He hadn't told anyone where he was meeting. "Your mom?" he said slowly. "What's her name?" The little girl grinned, proud to know the answer. "Sophie. Sophie Lane. Sophie." He felt the name settle in his chest. It wasn't the name from his app. But before he could say anything, the girl climbed onto the bench opposite him, setting her soggy umbrella carefully beside her, as if she had done this 100 times. The waitress approached, uncertain. Julian raised a hand lightly. "It's fine," he said. She's waiting for her mom." The waitress nodded and disappeared toward the counter. The girl looked at him curiously, tilting her head. "Are you sad?" Julian smiled faintly. "Maybe a little." "You shouldn't be. Mommy says when you wait, it means something good's about to happen." He stared at her, struck by the strange wisdom in such a small package. Outside, the rain slowed, turning to a soft drizzle. The hum of the refrigerator and the low buzz of a neon sign filled the silence between them. Julian leaned back against the booth, the tension in his shoulders easing for the first time that night. The chair across from him was no longer empty. The little girl smiled again, propping her chin on her hands as she studied him. "You look lonely," she said simply. And for reasons he couldn't explain, Julian laughed. The sound startled even him, a small, unguarded sound that felt like the first breath after holding it too long. The girl smiled wider. See, Mommy was right. He looked toward the window, where the reflection of the diner lights glowed against the glass. And in it, he saw the small figure sitting opposite him, swinging her legs under the table. For the first time in a long while, the space across from him wasn't a reminder of what was missing. It was the beginning of something he couldn't name yet. Outside, the rain stopped completely. Inside, Julian stayed seated, the napkins still folded, neatly beside his coffee. The warmth of a new story quietly taking root. The bell over the diner door jingled again, and a rush of damp air followed a woman inside. Sophie Lane looked like she had run through the rain without caring if she got wet. Her blonde hair was half pulled back, the rest falling loose around her face. Strands clinging to her cheeks, she wore a dark blue scrubs top under an oversized hoodie, and her sneakers left small, wet prints across the floor. She spotted the booth immediately and hurried over, breathless. "I'm so sorry," she said, pushing her hair behind her ear. There was an old man who fell outside the subway entrance. "I waited until the paramedics came." Her voice was warm, tired, honest. No rehearsed apology, no embellishment. Julian blinked still, processing how this night had unfolded. "Most people wouldn't stop," he said quietly. Sophie gave a small, tired laugh. "Most people think someone else will." Then she turned to her daughter. "Maddie, what did I say about running off Maddie's shoulders?" Lifted in a small shrug. "You said not to, but he looked sad." Sophie sighed, but Julian smiled faintly. "It's okay, she's right." Sophie looked at him, then studying his face for the first time. There was something about his eyes she thought steady but guarded, like he'd seen too much of life's noise, and was still learning how to hear quiet again. She hesitated. "We didn't mean to interrupt your dinner. We'll get out of your way." "Actually," Julian said, before he could stop himself, "you already saved it." Sophie blinked, unsure how to answer that. Maddie took it as permission to stay and slid a menu toward her mother. "Mommy, can we get pancakes?" "He can have some too." "Maddie," Sophie whispered, mortified. "That's not how we can share the pancakes if you want." Maddie interrupted, turning her big brown eyes toward Julian. He smiled. "That sounds perfect." The waitress approached with a coffee pot, smiling knowingly. "Refill for you." Julian nodded, and Sophie murmured a quick thank you. She wrapped her hands around the warm mug, exhaling softly as the chill left her fingers. There was something comforting about the clatter of plates, the hum of the jukebox, the low conversation of strangers. It made the world feel smaller, safer. "I promise we'll get out of your hair soon," she said again, embarrassed. "Please," Julian replied. "I'd like the company." Maddie giggled as syrup dripped onto her plate, tracing patterns with the edge of her fork. Mommy says syrup makes everything better, she announced. Even bad days. She's not wrong, Julian said. Is today a bad day? Maddie tilted her head. Maybe, but it's raining and I like the rain. Sophie cut in, smiling apologetically. She talks a lot. That's a good thing, Julian said. It means she hasn't learned to hold back yet. Something in the way he said it made Sophie pause. She recognized that tone, the kind people use when they remember something they wish they hadn't lost. Maddie looked up. What about you? Do you like the rain? Julian thought for a moment. I used to, but I forgot why. Then we'll remind you, Maddie said simply, as if it were the easiest promise in the world. Sophie glanced at her daughter, half amused, half exasperated. Maddie, maybe Mr. J wants to eat in peace. Jay's not eating, Maddie pointed out. He's thinking. Sophie turned back to him. Jay, huh? Is that short for something? Just Jay? He said the lie, quiet but heavy in his chest. She nodded, accepting it without question. For a while they ate in silence, the kind of silence that didn't feel empty. Sophie cut the pancakes into neat squares, passing half the plate to Maddie, who dunked each piece into syrup before handing one to Julian. Here, she said proudly, you have to try it my way. He accepted it, smiling as the sweetness hit his tongue. Approved, he said. Sophie laughed softly, a sound that made something shift inside him. She had one of those voices that carried warmth without trying, the kind that stayed in your head after you heard it. When the meal ended, Sophie checked the time and sighed. We should get going. I still have to read a chapter before my night class. Maddie frowned. Do we have to? Yes, honey. She looked at Julian. Thank you for not minding the interruption. It was the best interruption I've had in years, he said. Sophie shook her head, smiling, unsure whether to believe him. Maddie reached into her small backpack and pulled out a folded napkin covered in crayon marks. Here, she said, handing it to him. On it were 3 stick figures sitting in a diner booth. One tall, one medium, one small, with the words scrawled unevenly across the bottom. Jay's not lonely anymore. Sophie gasped softly. Maddie, that's not. It's okay, Julian interrupted. It's perfect. He looked at the drawing longer than he needed to, then carefully folded it and slipped it into his jacket pocket as if it were something fragile. Sophie helped Maddie with her coat, then turned back to him. You take care, Jay. You too, he said. Both of you. The bell chimed as they stepped out into the damp night, the little girl's laughter fading into the sound of passing cars. Julian sat for a long moment, staring at the empty plate at the second cup of coffee that had gone cold again. The booth across from him was empty once more, but it didn't feel the same. For the first time in years, he wasn't haunted by the emptiness. He was waiting for something he didn't yet understand, something that had entered his life, wearing a yellow raincoat and a fearless smile. The next evening, Julian found himself back at Maple Diner without entirely knowing why. Maybe it was the quiet comfort of the place, or maybe it was the echo of Maddie's laughter that seemed to linger in his memory long after he had left. The rain had cleared, but the streets were still wet, reflecting the glow of the city lights like rivers of gold. Inside, the air smelled of cinnamon and coffee. He slid into the same booth, glancing at the napkin drawing he had refolded a dozen times since last night. Jay's not lonely anymore. He told himself it was ridiculous to come back. She probably wasn't even working tonight. Yet when he heard the small chime of the order bell and saw Sophie turn from the counter, her hair pulled into a messy bun, sleeves rolled to her elbows, he felt something shift in his chest. She noticed him almost immediately and smiled, surprised. "Back again," she called. He shrugged. "The pancakes were better than my meeting. You have a meeting at 9 p.m. I make my own hours." "Must be nice," she said, sliding a menu toward him, even though she already knew what he'd order. "Coffee and pancakes." "Please." Maddie peeked from behind the counter, wearing an oversized apron that reached her ankles. "Mommy, he's back." Sophie sighed. "You're supposed to be drawing, not spying on customers." "He's not a customer," Maddie said with a grin. "He's our friend." Julian chuckled. "I'll take that." When Sophie returned with his plate, Maddie ran over and climbed into the seat beside him. "Look, I made you another one," she said proudly, handing him a new crayon drawing. This time the stick figures were smiling, and she'd drawn a big sun above them. "You look happier now," she said. "Maybe I am," Julian answered softly. "Good," Maddie said. "Mommy says happiness is like pancakes, you have to make more when it runs out." Sophie shook her head, laughing under her breath. "You talk too much." "You say that, but I'm funny," Maddie said confidently. "She's not wrong," Julian replied. Sophie arched an eyebrow. "Don't encourage her." The three of them laughed, and for a moment the world outside the noise, the headlines, the endless weight of responsibility fell away. They talked between bites. Sophie told him she worked mornings at the diner and evenings studying nursing. "It's not glamorous," she said, "but it's steady. Maddie starts second grade this fall, so we'll figure it out." "You do a lot," Julian said. "Most days I just try to keep the bills paid," and Maddie fed. "That's the American dream, right?" she said with a dry smile. "You make it sound easy." "It's not," she said, "but I've had harder." She didn't elaborate, and he didn't press. Maddie interrupted, holding up a half-eaten piece of toast. "Do you make robots?" Julian blinked. "Robots?" "You said you worked in tech," Sophie explained. "That was before. I built systems that tried to make life easier, but they never learned how to be kind." Sophie tilted her head. "That's a strange thing to say. Machines can do anything except care," he said quietly. "People forget that matters most." For a second, neither of them spoke. Then Maddie dropped her orange juice, and it spilled across the table in a bright, sticky wave. "Oh no," she gasped. Sophie reached for napkins, but Julian was already moving. He pulled a small folded handkerchief from his pocket and began dabbing at the mess, careful not to touch Sophie's hands as he worked. She watched him, surprised by the precision of the gesture, the way his movements were calm and practiced. "You carry a handkerchief?" she asked. "Old habit," he said. "My mother said a gentleman should always be prepared for small disasters." "She sounds smart." "She was," he said, and his tone softened. Sophie noticed it, the quiet past tense. "Sorry," she murmured. "Don't be." He finished cleaning the table, folded the cloth neatly, and set it aside. The jukebox hummed a slow jazz tune from the corner, something nostalgic, as if the night itself wanted to pause. "You remind me of someone who never gave up," he said suddenly. Sophie blinked, unsure how to respond. "Maybe I just never had the choice," she said finally, her voice low but steady. He looked at her for a long moment, something unspoken, flickering behind his calm expression. In that moment, the chatter of the diner faded, replaced by the simple rhythm of clinking plates, and Maddie's hum of a tune she was making up on the spot. Sophie gathered the plates when they finished, but Julian insisted on carrying them to the counter. "You don't have to," she said. "I know," he replied, "but I want to." He walked back to the booth, slid his jacket on, and smiled down at Maddie, who was busy drawing again. I should go, it's getting late. Will you come back? She asked. Maybe, he said. If I'm invited. You are, Maddie said without hesitation. You can sit with us next time too. Sophie rolled her eyes affectionately. We'll see, Maddie. We'll see means yes. Maddie whispered to Julian. He laughed quietly. Good to know. As Sophie and Maddie left for the night, Julian remained seated for a moment longer, watching the reflection of their figures disappear into the glow of the streetlights outside. He reached into his pocket and unfolded the napkin, drawing again, now slightly creased at the edges. Jay's not lonely anymore. He smiled to himself, folded it carefully, and slipped it back into his jacket. The waitress came by to clear his table. Same time tomorrow, she teased. Maybe, Julian said. But as he stepped outside into the cool night air, he already knew he'd be back. Morning sunlight spilled through the diner's large windows, cutting across the faded linoleum floor and the chrome counter stools that hadn't been new since the 90s. The air smelled of maple syrup, sizzling bacon, and coffee freshly ground. It was the kind of smell that made ordinary mornings feel like second chances. Julian pushed open the door, the bell above him, chiming softly, and felt the warmth of the place wrap around him. He hadn't planned on returning, not consciously, but something about the quiet hum of this small diner and the faces that didn't look up, expecting something from him, had become strangely addictive. Sophie was behind the counter hair in a loose ponytail, scribbling orders while talking to a cook in the kitchen. She looked different in daylight, more grounded, her eyes clearer, but tired in a way that made her seem human and strong all at once. When she spotted him, she raised a brow, half teasing. Back again. You must really love our pancakes. Julian smiled, easing into the booth by the window, the same one. The pancakes were better than my meeting, he said. She laughed lightly, wiping her hands on her apron. You always have meetings, fewer now, he said simply. Trying to spend more time in places that don't have glass walls. Sophie gave him a curious look, then shrugged and poured him coffee. Well, I can't promise the same service as a boardroom, but we have better coffee. I believe it, Julian said. The mug was chipped on the rim, but the warmth of it between his palms felt real. From the corner, a small voice piped up, Mommy, he's back. Maddie emerged from behind the counter, wearing her pink backpack, even though it was Saturday. Look, I drew you again. She ran up and handed him a piece of paper, covered in crayon colors. The drawing showed the same booth with 3 smiling figures and a big yellow sun above them. You look happier now, she announced. Julian looked down at it, genuinely smiling. You keep getting better, he said. I'm practicing. Miss Harper says, if I draw happy things, I'll feel happy too. Does it work? He asked. Sometimes, she said, shrugging. It's easier when Mommy's around. Sophie returned with a plate of pancakes and a side of eggs, setting them down. You don't have to keep drawing him, Maddie. He's part of our story, the girl said confidently. Stories need everyone. Sophie sighed, but Julian could see the amusement in her eyes. She's determined, he said. She gets it from her mother, Sophie replied. Stubborn, persistent, she corrected. They shared a smile, one that lingered just long enough for both of them to notice. As the morning rush slowed, Julian offered to help carry plates to the back. You really don't have to, Sophie said, balancing a tray. I like helping, he replied, taking a few cups from her. Besides, I'm good at fixing things. Oh yeah, she teased. Like what? Broken light fixtures, coffee machines. Bad mornings, he said, half joking. She laughed softly. We could use all 3. Later, when the last customer left, Julian noticed the flickering bulb near the register. "Mind if I take a look? Go ahead," she said, watching as he climbed on a chair, adjusting the socket with careful hands. When the light steadied, the room filled with a soft golden glow. "There," he said. "No more shadows." "Thank you," she said quietly, and something about the way she looked at him made the air feel thicker. "You're good at fixing things, I'll give you that." "Sometimes," he said. "But some things take longer." "Like what? Trust," he said simply. She didn't respond right away. The silence between them wasn't awkward, just full. In the background, Maddie was humming to herself, coloring at the counter. When the hum faded, Sophie leaned against the booth, crossing her arms. "You always come alone," she said. Why Julian thought about lying, then didn't. Because most of the time, people only see what they can take from me. Here I get to just be someone waiting for pancakes. Sophie studied him for a moment. "That's a nice change, I guess." "It is," he said, and meant it. They talked about small things after that. About Maddie's school projects, about the diner's old jukebox that still worked on quarters, about how Sophie was taking night classes to finish her nursing degree. "It's slow going," she said, "but one day I want to start a reading program for kids at the library down the street. Not everyone can afford books, you know." Julian nodded. "That sounds like something worth building." "Maybe," she said. "For now it's just a dream between shifts." He wanted to tell her he could make it happen, that he could fund the whole thing by tomorrow morning. But he bit back the impulse. Night wasn't about saving someone. It was about learning to listen. When he left the city was awash in late morning light. He stood on the sidewalk, glancing through the diner window where Sophie was wiping down tables and Maddie was drawing beside her. He pulled out his phone, the screen lighting his face. A notification from the dating app blinked, "New message. Still waiting to meet you, Jay." He stared at it for a long second, then quietly deleted the app. The reflection in the glass showed him smiling faintly. A man untethered from everything that used to define him. The neon sign flickered above Maple Diner, open all hours, and for the first time in a long time, he felt like maybe he was too. It began on a Tuesday morning like any other. The diner buzzed softly with the rhythm of plates clinking and the sizzle of bacon from the open kitchen. Sophie moved easily between tables, her ponytail swinging, as she poured coffee refills and smiled at regulars who called her name. Julian sat in his usual booth, reading the paper, but not really seeing it. He was waiting for Maddie's laugh, for Sophie's voice, for that quiet slice of normal that had somehow become the best part of his week. He didn't notice the girl sitting at the corner table, near the window, her phone propped against her water glass. She was filming, giggling quietly with a friend. "Watch this," she whispered. "That waitress is like so sweet to that guy. It's giving Hallmark movie." The camera caught it all the moment Sophie leaned forward to refill Julian's cup, smiling at something he said, the way Maddie peeked around the counter and waved how Sophie playfully rolled her eyes, but smiled anyway. The caption appeared later that afternoon on TikTok. "Cute waitress comforts broke guy at Brooklyn Diner. Proof kindness still exists in NYC." The clip exploded overnight, 2 million views by sunrise. The comments were a mix of awe and amusement. "This is why I love New York. Find me a Sophie in my city, please." Plot twist, he's secretly a millionaire. The last one wasn't far off. Within hours, someone recognized him. A user named A Tech Insider posted a side-by-side photo. "Wait, does anyone else think this looks like Julian Hart?" the heart-mind guy who ghosted after the layoffs. The thread spread like wildfire. By noon, news outlets had picked it up. Disgraced tech billionaire pretends to be broke and dates waitress. His face, once hidden behind anonymity, was back on every feed. Screenshots of the video were everywhere. Sophie's kind smile, Maddie's wave, Julian's quiet laugh. Each moment now twisted into a story they didn't control. Sophie didn't even know until she came in for the lunch shift and her manager showed her his phone. "You see this?" he asked, scrolling through comments. "You're trending." "You and that guy." She frowned. "What are you talking about?" "That guy who comes in every morning. The video says he's broke, but people are saying he's some billionaire." "You didn't know." Sophie felt her stomach drop. "That's ridiculous," she said, taking the phone. But as soon as she saw the freeze frame of Julian's face, she knew. The stillness in her hands turned to trembling. The article headline glared back at her fallen CEO, playing Poor Finds New Romance at Brooklyn Diner. She couldn't breathe. When Julian walked in that afternoon, every eye turned toward him. Conversations hushed, coffee cups paused midair. The manager pretended to busy himself behind the counter, but the tension was thick enough to taste. Julian froze for a heartbeat, then stepped forward. Sophie stood near the register, her expression unreadable. "Sophie," he said quietly, "we need to talk." "Do we?" she asked. "Or do I just get to read about it online like everyone else? It's not what it looks like." "Then tell me what it is," she said, her voice steady but shaking underneath. "Who are you really?" The question hit harder than any accusation. He hesitated, every lie and half-truth catching in his throat. "My name is Julian Hart," he said finally. The room went silent except for the soft hum of the refrigerator. Sophie blinked. The same Julian Hart who fired 200 people on a live stream. "That's not," "Don't," she said sharply. "Don't explain. I don't want excuses. You came here every day pretending to be someone else, and I thought—" She trailed off, swallowing hard. "I thought you were just normal." "I wanted to be," he said. "With you I was." "No," she said quietly, shaking her head. "You were hiding. There's a difference." Maddie peeked out from the kitchen, sensing the tension. Mommy Sophie turned quickly. "Go back inside, honey." Julian took a step closer, lowering his voice. "I didn't mean to lie. I just wanted one part of my life that wasn't about headlines or money." "Then you should have told me when you had the chance," Sophie said, "before I let you into our lives." He searched her face, desperate. "You think I planned this, that I knew that video was being filmed?" "It doesn't matter," she said, "because now it's everywhere." Her voice broke on the last word, and she turned away. "You should go, Sophie. Please," she said, barely above a whisper. "Just go." Julian hesitated, but there was nothing left to say. He walked out, the bell above the door chiming one last time. The next morning, Maple Diner was quieter than usual. Sophie's phone buzzed nonstop calls from friends, reporters, strangers asking for interviews. She deleted the app. Outside, a group of onlookers had gathered, phones raised, hoping for another viral clip. Maddie asked what was happening, but Sophie didn't know how to explain it. How do you tell a 7-year-old that the person who made you laugh every morning wasn't who you thought he was? That sometimes the truth doesn't fix what's broken, it just breaks it more. She stood behind the counter, staring at the booth where he used to sit, the same spot bathed in morning light, now empty. Somewhere across the city, Julian stared at his reflection in a blacked-out window of his penthouse. The phone on his desk buzzed endlessly with PR calls and demands for statements. He ignored them all. The city moved on as it always did, but the diner, the one place where he'd felt human, was now a headline. And for the first time in years, he had no idea how to fix what mattered most. The story spread faster than either of them could have imagined. By the end of the week, it wasn't just social media, it was television podcasts, morning talk shows, strangers, debating in comment sections about the billionaire who played poor. Headlines painted Sophie as the naive single mom caught in a modern fairy tale gone wrong. Some called her an opportunist, others a hero. Both versions were lies. She had only ever been a woman trying to get by. But now every time she walked to work, she felt eyes following her. The manager at Maple Diner pulled her aside on Friday morning, avoiding eye contact. "Look, Sophie," he began, scratching the back of his neck. "You're great, everyone knows that. But this whole thing is bringing attention we can't handle. Customers are filming, reporters are calling. It's not good for business." She folded her arms, trying to steady her voice. "So what are you saying?" "Maybe take some time off, just until it dies down. Unpaid." He hesitated. "You know I can't afford." "It's temporary," he said, quickly already, walking away. Sophie stood there, apron still tied around her waist, as the clatter of the diner went on, like nothing had happened. By the time she got home that evening, Maddie was sitting at the kitchen table, crayons spread around her, a half-finished drawing in front of her. "Mommy, everyone at school was talking about you," she said quietly. Sophie froze, keys still in her hand. "What do you mean?" "They showed me a picture on their phones," Maddie said. "They said my mommy is dating a liar." Sophie's chest tightened. "Hey, look at me," she said, kneeling down. "That's not true, okay? People online don't always tell the truth." Maddie frowned. "Then why are they so mean?" "Because sometimes people don't understand what they see," she said softly. "They like stories more than real people." That night, after putting Maddie to bed, Sophie sat alone at the small kitchen table, her laptop open, the glow casting long shadows across the room. She searched his name, Julian Hart, and watched the flood of articles scroll by. Ex-CEO spotted posing as diner regular. From Billionaire to Brooklyn Booth. The fall of Hartmine's golden boy. His face was everywhere again, the face she now knew too well. There was one photo that caught her off guard, him standing outside Maple Diner. Head lowered, hands in his jacket pockets, looking not powerful, not defiant, but lost. She shut the laptop, the sound too loud in the quiet apartment. Her phone buzzed. Unknown number. She ignored it. Then it buzzed again. A text this time. "Sophie, please, let me explain." She stared at the message, her thumb hovering over the screen, before locking it again. She couldn't do this. Not yet. Across town, Julian sat alone in his penthouse for the first time in months. The view from the 37th floor stretched over the East River, glittering under city lights, but he couldn't feel any of it. The space was quiet, sterile white marble, chrome, and glass. It felt nothing like the warmth of that diner, the laughter of a child coloring in the corner, the smell of syrup and coffee. He turned on the television out of habit and immediately regretted it. The billionaire who fooled Brooklyn, the host, said with a smile, "You can't make this stuff up." He muted the screen, his reflection ghosting over the image. The world was watching, and he'd never felt more invisible. On his desk sat a small folded napkin, crumpled but intact, the first drawing Maddie had given him. "Jay's not lonely anymore." He traced the letters with his thumb and realized that wasn't true anymore. Not again. The next morning, his assistant left a stack of documents on the counter: press statements, damage control plans, interview requests. Julian didn't even look at them. "Tell them no," he said. "No interviews, no statements." "Sir," she began, "if you don't clarify, people will." "Let them," he said flatly. "I'm done explaining myself." When she left, he looked out at the skyline. He had spent years building walls out of glass, thinking transparency meant safety. Now those same walls made him feel like he was living inside a fishbowl, everyone watching, everyone judging. By Sunday, the noise had quieted online, but not inside him. Sophie hadn't answered his calls or texts. He told himself to respect that. But at night, his mind replayed every small moment. The first time she laughed, the way Maddie's voice had filled the booth, the quiet grace Sophie carried, even when she was tired. He remembered the way she said, "You shouldn't have lied," and he knew she was right. But he also knew the truth wasn't that simple. He hadn't lied to deceive her. He'd lied because, for once, he wanted someone to see him without the armor. He wanted to be Jay, the man at the diner, not Julian Hart, the man who broke things he didn't know how to fix. In her apartment, Sophie stared at the small stack of drawings Maddie had made over the past week. Each one had the same 3 stick figures holding hands under a bright yellow sun. Maddie's hope was simple, uncomplicated, and unbreakable. Sophie wished she could see the world that way again. But bills sat unopened on the counter. Rent was due. She couldn't afford the luxury of sentiment. When Maddie asked if they were going to the diner tomorrow, Sophie hesitated. "Not for a while, baby," she said. "Why?" "Because sometimes when people make mistakes, it's better to give them time to make them right." Maddie thought about that for a long moment. "Then we should wait. Waiting means something good's about to happen." Sophie smiled faintly. "You really believe that you said it once," Maddie replied. "And Mommy's always right." Sophie kissed her forehead and tucked her in. Her eyes stinging. In the quiet that followed, the city hummed beyond the window, alive with 1,000 stories crossing paths, breaking, mending, starting again. Somewhere among them, 2 people who had found each other by accident were learning that love, real love, wasn't about fairy tales or perfect timing. It was about what came after the breaking. And for now, both of them sat in their separate silences, holding on to the same small hope that somehow the story wasn't over yet. 3 days passed before she heard the knock. It came softly at first, almost uncertain, like the sound of rain brushing against the door. Sophie froze her hands, still wet from washing dishes. The apartment was dim, the only light coming from the small lamp beside Maddie's bed. Outside, thunder murmured over Brooklyn. She waited, heart-thudding. Then another knock, firmer this time. She wiped her hands on a towel and walked toward the door. Through the peephole she saw him, Julian Hart. Not the man from the news, not the CEO in $1,000 suits, but the man who had sat in her booth, the man who once helped wipe spilled juice off her table. He was soaked through hair plastered to his forehead, hoodie dripping water onto the hallway floor. In each hand he held a plastic grocery bag. For a long moment she said nothing, just stared at him through the glass. He looked up slowly, eyes searching, weary. "Sophie," he said, his voice muffled by the rain. "Please just let me say one thing." She opened the door, not out of forgiveness, but because she couldn't bring herself to shut it. "You shouldn't be here," she said. "I know," he replied, shifting the bags awkwardly. "But I had to come." He lifted one slightly. Ramen noodles, chicken-flavored, the kind Maddie likes. He lifted the other. Popcorn chocolate, some dollar store snacks I probably shouldn't have bought. Sophie's lips parted, caught somewhere between disbelief and anger. You came all this way to bring junk food? No, he said quietly. I came because I miss having breakfast with you two. Behind her, small footsteps padded across the wooden floor. Mommy, who is it? Maddie peeked around the doorway, her hair messy from sleep. Her eyes widened. Jay. She ran forward before Sophie could stop her. You came back. Julian crouched instinctively, setting the bags down. Hey, sunshine, he said softly. I brought snacks. She grinned, wrapping her arms around his neck. Mommy washed your handkerchief, she said proudly. Running to the table and grabbing the small folded square of fabric, she held it out to him with both hands. We saved this for you. Julian took it slowly, his throat tightening as he unfolded the soft, clean cloth. It smelled faintly of detergent and home. Thank you, he whispered. Sophie stood frozen, her arms crossed, trying to stay angry but failing. The sight of her daughter's smile, the sincerity in his eyes, it broke something open inside her. You shouldn't have come, she said again, but her voice lacked conviction. I know, he said, rising to his feet. I'm not here as a CEO. I'm not here with statements or apologies. I'm just a man who can't stop thinking about the two people who made him feel human again. Sophie blinked hard, fighting tears. You broke something real, she said. You lied. I know, he said. And I'm sorry. I didn't mean to lie to you. I just didn't know how to tell you who I was without losing what I found here. She looked away, her jaw trembling. You don't get to just walk back in and fix it. Then let me earn it, he said softly. One breakfast at a time. Rain tapped gently against the window as silence settled between them. Maddie tugged at her mother's sleeve. Mommy, he looks cold. Sophie exhaled, half laugh, half sigh. Of course he does. She turned to Julian. Come in before you drown. He stepped inside, careful not to drip too much water on the floor. The apartment was small but warm, the kind of place built by routine and quiet strength. He glanced around, noticing the small bookshelf, stacked with nursing textbooks, the fridge covered in Maddie's drawings. The single vase on the table, holding a few wilting daisies. It felt more like home than any penthouse ever had. Sophie poured him a towel and a glass of water. You're not staying, she warned. I didn't plan to, he said, though he wasn't sure that was true. Just wanted to see you both, make sure you're okay. We're fine, she said quickly, defensive. We always are. Maddie climbed onto the couch with a bag of popcorn patting the spot beside her. Come sit, she said cheerfully. Julian hesitated, then sat down. The couch sagged under his weight, the fabric rough but comforting. Maddie clicked on the TV and scrolled through a cartoon channel. You like dragons, she asked. He smiled. I love dragons. Sophie watched them from the kitchen, arms still crossed, but her expression softened. The scene was absurd, her daughter feeding popcorn to a billionaire, while rain poured outside, but somehow it felt right. Maddie leaned against him, yawning halfway through the episode. Within minutes she was asleep, her small hand still clutching his sleeve. Julian adjusted the blanket around her shoulders, his movements gentle, careful. She missed you, Sophie said quietly. I missed her too, he replied. And you? She looked away. You should leave before she wakes up and thinks everything's back to normal. Sophie, he said, standing. I know I hurt you. I know I made a mess of something good, but I don't care what the headlines say. I care about what you think when I knock on this door. I care about her smile when I show up. I care that you feel seen, not saved, just seen. Sophie's voice cracked. You really bought ramen 2 kinds, he said. The spicy one and the one with the cartoon chicken. She let out a wet, broken laugh, tears spilling despite herself. You're ridiculous, probably, he said. But I'm still here. The room fell quiet again. The TV flickered softly, the cartoon's colors dancing over their faces. Sophie took a step closer, her eyes searching his. You can't fix everything, she whispered. I know, he said, but I can start with dinner. She stared at him for a long time before nodding toward the kitchen. Then you better start boiling water. Julian smiled faintly, relief breaking through the tension. He followed her into the small kitchen, rolling up his sleeves. The simple domesticity of it, all the sound of the stove clicking, the smell of instant ramen, the hum of the refrigerator felt sacred. No shareholders, no PR teams, no performance. Just 2 people learning how to exist in the same quiet space again. As they stood side by side, Sophie finally spoke. You know this doesn't mean I've forgiven you. I wouldn't ask you to, he said. Not yet. She looked at him, her eyes softer now. But you came back. I had nowhere else I wanted to be. The rain outside softened to a drizzle, the rhythm sinking with the faint laughter from the cartoon still playing in the other room. When they carried the steaming bowls to the coffee table, Maddie stirred, blinking awake. You stayed, she mumbled sleepily. Julian smiled. I did. Hope that's okay. She yawned and grinned. Only if you eat all the noodles. Deal. They ate together quietly, like people rediscovering something fragile and good. Sophie didn't look at him much, but every time she did, her gaze lingered a second longer than before. When the dishes were cleared and the rain finally stopped, she stood by the window, watching the city lights blur into the wet glass. Julian joined her, keeping a respectful distance. Thank you for letting me in, he said softly. Don't thank me, she replied. Just mean it this time. I do, he said, every word. She turned to face him. Then maybe, she said slowly, this doesn't have to be the end. He exhaled something like hope flickering in his eyes. I was never good at endings anyway. She smiled faintly. Good. Because Maddie already asked if you can come for breakfast tomorrow. He laughed quietly, a sound that filled the small apartment like sunlight breaking through clouds. For the first time since everything had fallen apart, the silence between them didn't feel heavy. It felt like a beginning. Days turned into weeks, and somehow the noise of the scandal faded, replaced by the quiet rhythm of small, ordinary moments that mattered more than any headline ever had. Julian didn't talk about his company or his money anymore. He showed up every morning at Maple Diner sometimes before it opened, helping Sophie wipe down tables or restock napkins. The regulars had stopped whispering by then. They saw the way he carried himself not like a man trying to prove something, but like someone learning how to live without an audience. Maddie, of course, declared him her honorary breakfast buddy, and Sophie had long since stopped pretending. She didn't find it endearing. One Saturday, he arrived early with paint cans and brushes. The diner's walls had begun to fade, the pastel yellow turning dull and cracked over the years. Sophie frowned when she saw the supplies. What's all this? A surprise, he said. You've been talking about wanting to brighten the place up. Thought I'd help. Julian, you don't have to. I know, he said, smiling. That's why it matters. She hesitated, then sighed. All right. But if you spill paint on my floor, you're scrubbing it yourself. Deal? They spent the morning painting their laughter, mingling with the smell of coffee and wet plaster. Maddie ran around with a small roller, leaving uneven patches that Julian later fixed but never told her. When the last stroke dried, the walls glowed a warm, welcoming gold. Sophie leaned back, wiping sweat from her forehead. "It looks new again," she said softly. "It feels new again," Julian replied. The moment lingered quiet and full. Later that evening, when business slowed, he stayed to help her close. They worked side by side, cleaning tables, sweeping crumbs, refilling sugar jars. It was such an ordinary thing, yet Sophie found herself glancing at him more often than she meant to, noticing how he hummed softly while he worked, how he smiled easily now. She couldn't remember the last time she'd seen someone so at peace, doing something so simple. "Why do you keep coming back?" she asked suddenly, not looking up. "Because this is the only place that makes sense," he said. She laughed softly. "That's not much of an answer." "Maybe not," he said, "but it's true." When they locked the door and stepped outside, the night was clear, the city lights shimmering against the wet pavement. Sophie pulled her jacket tighter around her. "You know you could go anywhere," she said. "You don't have to be here." "I know," he said, "but I want to be." She studied him in the glow of the streetlight, her breath visible in the cool air. Why he met her gaze? "Because when I'm here, I'm not Julian Hart, CEO of anything. I'm just a man who gets to be seen." She didn't answer, but the way her eyes softened told him she understood. The next morning, Julian helped Maddie with her homework at the diner's counter while Sophie brewed coffee. "What's 6 times 7? He asked. "Easy," Maddie said. 42. "You're good at this," he said. "I'm practicing. Mommy says if I keep practicing, I can be anything." He smiled. "She's right." "What did you want to be when you were little?" she asked, swinging her legs. Julian paused. "I think I just wanted to be happy," he said. "Did it work?" Maddie asked with perfect sincerity. "Not for a long time," he said, "but I think it's working now." Sophie looked up from the coffee machine, catching his eye, and something unspoken passed between them. Gratitude, maybe, or recognition. That afternoon, he fixed the diner's leaky faucet without being asked, then joined Sophie and Maddie at the park across the street. They sat on a bench sharing ice cream cones, Maddie with chocolate smudged on her chin. "You have something right here," Julian said, pointing. She wiped the wrong side of her face, making it worse. Sophie laughed and handed him a napkin. "You started this. You clean it up." "Yes, ma'am," he said gently, wiping the chocolate away. When Maddie ran off to play, Sophie turned to him. "She's happy again," she said quietly. "Thank you for that." "You don't owe me thanks," he said. "You gave me a reason to stop running." "You really mean that she asked?" "Every word." They fell silent, watching Maddie chase pigeons across the grass. The late afternoon light wrapped the park in gold, and for a fleeting moment it felt like everything broken had found its way back to something whole. That evening, as Sophie wiped down the last table, Julian lingered by the counter. "You ever think about what comes next?" he asked. "Next," she repeated. After all this he said, after the noise, the stories, the mistakes. She thought for a moment. "I think about tomorrow, and about pancakes. That's enough for me." "And if tomorrow looks like this?" he asked. "Then I guess we're lucky," she said. The jukebox crackled softly, playing an old Sinatra song. Without thinking, Julian extended a hand. "Dance with me?" She raised an eyebrow. "In the diner, where else?" he said, smiling. She hesitated, then placed her hand in his. They swayed slowly between the booths, their laughter mingling with the fading melody. The lights overhead flickered once, then steadied, casting them in a soft golden glow. Sophie rested her head lightly against his shoulder, and for the first time in years she didn't feel like she had to carry the world alone. When the song ended, they didn't move right away. "Julian," she said quietly, "whatever this is, I don't want promises. I just want honesty." "You have it," he said. "This time, that's all I've got." "Good," she said, stepping back, but not letting go of his hand, "because that's all I need." Outside the street was quiet. The city still moved around them, restless and endless. But inside that small diner on the corner of Brooklyn, something rare had taken root, something gentle, something real. And as Julian locked the door behind them, he realized he wasn't just fixing broken lights or leaky faucets anymore. He was learning one moment at a time how to belong again. By early spring, the city had started to thaw, and so had everything between them. The mornings at Maple Diner carried a different kind of warmth now. The regulars knew Julian by name, though few still connected him to the headlines that had burned through the internet months ago. To them, he was simply the quiet man who helped fix the jukebox, brewed the backup pot of coffee, and always tipped too much. Sophie had her job back, and the manager, after seeing business boom from the attention, pretended he'd never asked her to take time off. The diner had become more than a workplace again. It was a refuge, a kind of family built from burnt toast, second chances, and small acts of grace. Julian arrived early, most days sleeves rolled up, helping Sophie prep before the breakfast rush. "You don't have to do this," she told him one morning as he wiped down the counter. "I know," he said, smiling, "but I like doing things that make you smile." She shook her head, trying not to. "That's manipulative, you know, effective though." "Maybe a little," she admitted. Maddie burst through the door a few minutes later, backpack bouncing, her laughter filling the space. "Mommy, guess what Miss Harper said? My reading is the best in class." "That's amazing, baby," Sophie said, hugging her tight. "We've been practicing," Maddie said proudly, glancing at Julian. "Jay makes reading fun. He does all the voices." Julian grinned. "She means I embarrass myself." "It works," Maddie said, skipping toward the counter. "Can I have pancakes? It's Tuesday," Sophie said. "Exactly," Maddie said, as if that explained everything. They all laughed, and Julian found himself thinking that this tiny, ordinary moment was more valuable than any empire he'd ever built. Later that week, Sophie got a letter from the library down the street. They were launching a community reading program for children and looking for volunteers. She read the letter twice, then showed it to Julian. "This is what I always talked about," she said. "A reading nook, free books, story time. They're actually doing it. You should run it," he said. "Volunteer at least." "Maybe," she said, hesitant. "I don't know if I have the time. I'll help," he said. "You've done enough," she said softly. "Not even close." A few days later, she found out how serious he was. When she stopped by the library with Maddie, she noticed a new plaque above the children's corner. The lettering was simple but beautiful. "Donated with gratitude by a friend for the woman who makes time for strangers and the girl who makes him smile." Sophie stood frozen, her hand over her mouth. "Mommy," Maddie whispered, tugging her coat. "That's us." Sophie turned and saw Julian standing by the doorway, hands in his pockets, a shy, almost nervous look on his face. "You did this?" she asked. "I didn't want to make a big deal," he said. "You said you wanted it, and I thought maybe the world could use more places like that." She blinked, tears forming. "You didn't have to." "I wanted to," he said quietly. "You saved me before I even knew I needed saving." She laughed through her tears. "You really need to stop saying things like that. I'll start believing you mean them." "I do," he said simply. Maddie ran up, hugging his leg. "You're the best, Jay. Now we can read every day." He smiled and patted her head. "That's the plan." That evening, back at the diner, Sophie handed him a coffee, sitting across from him in the same booth where they had first met. "You know," she said, "when I first saw you sitting here, I thought you were just another man who'd been stood up." "I was," he said with a small smile, "until you and Maddie showed up. You make it sound like fate." "Maybe it was," he said. "Or maybe it was just rain and bad timing." She looked at him for a long moment. "You've changed," she said softly. "No," he said. "I just stopped pretending." "That's the same thing," she said, smiling faintly. They talked until the diner closed their conversation, drifting from small things, Maddie's new favorite book, Sophie's classes, to bigger ones, like the future neither dared to name out loud. When they finally stepped outside, the air was crisp, the streets glistening under the soft glow of the street lamps. Sophie pulled her scarf tighter. "You don't have to walk us home," she said. "I want to," he said. "It's 3 blocks," she teased. "Then I get 3 more blocks with you." She shook her head but didn't argue. Maddie walked ahead, humming to herself, her small figure skipping through puddles. When they reached her building, Sophie turned to him. "You can come in for coffee if you want," she said quietly. "If I come in, I might not leave," he said, half joking, half not. "Then maybe don't," she said, surprising herself. "Not yet." He smiled, understanding. "Soon then." "Maybe," she said. The way she looked at him told him she meant yes. The next morning, he returned to the diner early and left an envelope under the register. Inside was a check not for Sophie, but for the community program, enough to fund it for 3 years. He didn't sign his name. He didn't need to. Later that afternoon, she found the envelope. She recognized his handwriting instantly, though there was no signature. She looked out the window and saw him standing across the street, hands in his pockets, pretending to check his phone, but really waiting for her to look up. She stepped outside and crossed to him. "You're terrible at being anonymous," she said. "I wasn't trying very hard." "Why do you keep doing this?" she asked. "Because it feels good to build something that matters," he said. "And because it makes you smile." "You're impossible," she said. "I've been called worse." She laughed softly, then reached for his hand. "Come on, hero, you can buy me dinner." "Only if Maddie's invited." "She's always invited," Sophie said, smiling. They walked together toward the corner, Maddie waving from the diner window as they crossed. And for the first time since either of them could remember, everything felt steady, possible, and whole again. Spring arrived quietly that year, slipping into Brooklyn, like a long-forgotten promise. The air was soft again, the sky bluer, the streets humming with life that had slept through the cold. On a Saturday morning, the smell of pancakes drifted through Maple Diner as Sophie flipped the last batch onto a plate. Maddie sat at the counter coloring while Julian brewed coffee behind her, wearing an apron that clearly didn't fit him. "You're getting syrup on your elbows again," Sophie said without looking up. "Occupational hazard," Julian replied, pouring coffee into mismatched mugs. "You're not even paid," she teased. "That makes it worse." He grinned and passed her a cup. Maddie looked up from her drawing. "You two sound like you're married." Sophie choked on her coffee. "Maddie," what the girls said innocently, "you fight like you love each other." Julian laughed, setting the mug down. "She's too observant," he said. "Wonder where she gets that from." Sophie muttered, cheeks flushed. After breakfast, they decided to take a walk. The city felt new streets lined with blooming trees, vendors selling flowers, children chasing bubbles. Maddie carried her chalk set in a small tin box, the one she'd begged for since Christmas. "We're going to the park by the bridge," she said, skipping ahead. "That's where the best sidewalk is." Julian glanced at Sophie as they walked side by side. "You've created an artist," he said. "Or a future graffiti criminal," she replied. "Either way, she's passionate." They reached the park near the Brooklyn Bridge, where the view opened wide to the skyline and the river shimmered under sunlight. Maddie chose a quiet spot near the benches, kneeling down and opening her chalks like a professional. "No peeking until I'm done," she declared. "Got it," Julian said, sitting beside Sophie. They watched her draw in silence, the kind that felt comfortable, not empty. Around them, joggers passed, a street musician played an old jazz tune, and the world seemed to move at half speed. "Hard to believe it's only been a few months," Sophie said quietly. "Feels like years." "Good years," Julian said. She smiled faintly. "Yeah, the kind I didn't think I'd get again." He looked at her, his voice softer now. "You saved me, you know." "I didn't do anything," she said. "You showed up." That's everything he said. "For a long time, I didn't know how to." "You made it easy." "You made it hard," she said, smirking. "I'm still making it up to you," he said. "One breakfast at a time." She laughed, shaking her head. "You're doing fine." For a while, neither of them spoke. They just watched the water, the boats gliding by the wind, lifting loose strands of her hair. He wanted to tell her everything the way he'd started writing again. How he'd walked away from board meetings for good. How he was building something small and honest this time. But instead, he just reached out, brushing his fingers against hers. She didn't pull away. Maddie's voice broke the silence. "Okay, you can look now." They stood and walked over. On the sidewalk was a sprawling chalk, drawing in bright pastel colors. 3 figures stood under a big yellow sun holding hands. Beside them was a dog that didn't exist yet, but probably would one day. Over the picture, Maddie had written in uneven, happy letters, "My family, Mom J, and me." Sophie's hand flew to her mouth. "Oh, sweetheart," she whispered. Julian crouched beside the drawing, his throat tight. "That's beautiful, Maddie. Do you like it?" she asked. "I love it," he said. "You forgot the pancakes," Sophie teased gently. "Oh," Maddie laughed and quickly added a stack of pink circles beside the figures. "There." Julian smiled. "Perfect." Then, almost without realizing it, he reached for Sophie's hand. She didn't resist. They stood like that, the 3 of them framed by sunlight and chalk dust, the city rising behind them. "Mommy," Maddie said suddenly, "can Jay stay like forever?" Sophie glanced at Julian. He was already looking at her, his expression soft, uncertain, hopeful. He knelt down so he was eye level with the little girl. "That's a big question," he said. "What if she says no?" "Then you ask again tomorrow," Maddie said confidently. Sophie laughed through tears. "You're relentless," she said. "She's learning from the best," Julian said quietly. Then, more serious, he turned to Sophie. "Can I?" She blinked. "Can you what stay?" he said. "For every morning you thought you were alone." Her breath caught. The way he said it wasn't grand or rehearsed. It was raw, almost fragile. "You really want that?" she asked. "More than I've ever wanted anything," he said. "I don't care if we never leave this diner or this city. I just want to be where you and Maddie are." She looked at him for a long time, tears gathering at the corners of her eyes. Then she squeezed his hand. "You already have," she whispered. Maddie clapped her hands. "Yay, that means we can have pancakes every Saturday." Julian smiled through the lump in his throat. deal. The wind picked up scattering bits of chalk dust across the pavement, turning the drawing into a blur of color that shimmered under the morning light. Sophie knelt beside Maddie, fixing a stray curl behind her ear. "You know, one day this will wash away," she said. "That's okay," Maddie said. "We can draw it again." Julian watched them both, and something in him settled a peace he hadn't known he was missing. They spent the rest of the morning walking by the river Maddie, skipping ahead, while Julian and Sophie walked close behind. At one point, he reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small velvet box, weighing it in his palm. He didn't open it yet. The time would come. For now it was enough to walk beside them to feel the world slow down. When the afternoon sun began to dip, they headed back toward the diner. The windows glowed warm against the fading light, a beacon in the neighborhood that had once been just another corner of Brooklyn. Now it was home. Inside, the chalk dust still clung faintly to their shoes. Julian looked around, the laughter, the smell of syrup, the faint hum of the jukebox, and felt something inside him shift. He wasn't pretending anymore. He wasn't hiding. He was just here. And that was enough. Later that night, when Maddie had fallen asleep, on the couch with her crayons scattered around her, Julian and Sophie stood by the window watching the city lights flicker. "You ever think about how strange it all was?" she asked. "A blind date that never showed up, a little girl who did." "Maybe that's how life works," he said. "The right people show up when you stop looking for them." "You think we were meant to meet?" she asked. He smiled. "I think we were meant to stay." Outside, the street was quiet. A couple walked past, hand in hand, their laughter echoing faintly. Sophie leaned her head against his shoulder. "You know," she murmured, "for a lonely billionaire, you turned out to be pretty good company. For a tired waitress, you turned out to be everything," he said softly. She looked up at him, eyes shining. "Careful, Jay. That almost sounds like love." "Almost," he asked. "Fine," she said, smiling completely. They kissed, then soft, unhurried, the kind that didn't need fireworks or music because everything that mattered was already there. When they pulled apart, the clock above the stove ticked quietly, steady and certain. Julian glanced toward the window, where the faint outline of Maddie's chalk drawing still glowed on the sidewalk below, half faded by the breeze, but still visible under the streetlight. "You know," he said one day, "she's going to outgrow us." Sophie smiled. "Then we'll just have to keep giving her reasons to come home." He wrapped an arm around her, and together they watched the light spread across the street, the colors of the chalk merging into something new, something no rain could ever really wash away. Because sometimes the kindest love isn't the one that saves you. It's the one that simply stays. Sometimes love doesn't enter your life with a grand arrival. It slips in quietly, like the sound of rain against glass, or the laughter of a little girl in a diner when you least expect it. Julian never planned to fall in love that night. He only wanted to disappear, to be unseen, to find a moment where nobody cared about the man he used to be. But then there she was, a mother with tired eyes and a gentle smile, and a child who saw right through the loneliness he tried so hard to hide. Maybe that's how love truly begins, not with fireworks or music, but with someone noticing you when you think you've become invisible. Sophie didn't need a billionaire. She didn't even know he was one. What she needed was honesty, and in giving her that, Julian found what all the money in the world could never buy: peace. Maddie's chalk drawing may wash away with the next rain, but the truth behind it never will. Because family isn't always blood, Sometimes it's a choice, a hand that stays when the world tells you to let go. And maybe that's the rarest kind of love of all, the one that doesn't ask to be saved, only to be believed in. If you're listening to this, and you've ever been left sitting at an empty table, wondering if you're hard to love, I hope you remember this. The right ones don't run late forever. Some just take longer to find you. And when they do, you'll understand why everyone else had to leave first. Love doesn't need to be perfect. It only needs to be kind enough to stay. And maybe that's the real secret. Behind stories like this, it isn't about money or fate or second chances. It's about two people who finally stopped pretending they were fine and started being real with each other. That's when healing begins. That's when life starts to look like home again. Sometimes the kindest love isn't the one that saves you, it's the one that simply stays. If this story touched your heart, take a breath before you scroll away. Tell me in the comments, where are you watching from tonight? And have you ever met someone who simply stayed? If you have, hold them a little closer. If you haven't, don't give up. Because maybe, just maybe, they're already on their way to you right now. Thank you for spending time in this story with me. If you believe in gentle love and kindness that changes everything, in second chances that find you when you least expect them, make sure you subscribe and share this with someone who needs a little hope tonight. Because stories like this aren't just fiction. Somewhere out there, another Booth is waiting, another heart is healing, another quiet kind of love is beginning. And when it does, I hope it finds you ready to stay. With love, this is Emma's Stories.